In this fifth lesson, I will review the completed camera animation and pencil test for this production. It took a little over 5 weeks to complete the planning phase of this project. I'm going to discuss some of the changes that were made to improve the entertainment value of the production. I've made some major changes to the end of the sequence that has extended the length of the animation a bit. The first change I made was to Jeneeva's performance. I noticed that she uploaded a very cool dance solo about 2 weeks ago. It's a really cool performance, and because it's in a studio with a better staged camera, I can do a better job of extracting the minute details of the performance from the reference. She also does some really cool pauses between the performance, which adds some good texture to the sequence. So I thought it would fit into this animated shot perfectly. The next big change I made was at the end. I want the pace to pick up to an explosive conclusion. This means I don't want to end with Amadi's performance. I had an initial sequence from Latrice that is very explosive. The goal is to use a more electrifying effect to get the performer to the center of the stage, where Latrice's final performance will happen. In the first video of this series, I had planned to simulate some water bending effects in the last section of the performance. It was supposed to be a 3D version of the water effects in this Rihanna music video, but after fleshing out the entire pencil test, I realized how busy the shot is. I have the cane, the tail, and a lot of camera movement. Adding streams of water would just be too much. So I've decided to make some changes and instead go with a thin film of water on the stage. Enough to produce a reflection and enough to react to the character's footsteps and tail swats. It's actually also an idea that comes from the same Rihanna video. Starting with Girin's performance, I've started to flesh out the clothing for this pencil test. This is necessary for this stage because there are going to be notable clothing changes as the shot transitions between performers. There are also instances where the VFX is going to be primarily targeting clothing, so they have to be sketched. I should have sketched the clothing for the first part of this performance, especially because the varsity jacket will be altering the silhouette significantly, but it's not a big deal. Ultimately, I'm counting on nCloth simulations to tell me what is going to be happening with the jacket. But for all future pencil tests, I'll try to flesh out the clothing for the whole animatic. As you may have noticed, I have settled on a much larger tail size. Here's the reason why. A smaller sized tail would make it easier to get good silhouettes with the legs. A medium sized one would make it a constant challenge to get good silhouettes when the tail is right behind the legs, because it's big enough to always be in the mix, but not big enough for the entire silhouette to always be distinguishable from the legs. With a much bigger tail, the tail acts as a flat background that helps to outline the silhouette of the legs. Just like the clothing, I'm not going to go back to sketch a bigger tail for the first part of the performance. I'll just accommodate the change when it's time to block out the animation in 3D. A larger tail would just mean that the tail will be making contact with the ground a lot more. This entire performance has 3 teleportations. The first one will be executed as planned in the pencil test, a smoke teleportation with an illuminated core. The second teleportation happens in the middle of Girin's performance. This teleportation will now utilize an electric spark at the core for the explosion. The smoke will also stutter like electricity does. The third teleportation happens when the shot transitions from Amadi to Latrice's performance at the end. This teleportation will happen with a fluid effect since this part of the performance is characterized by fluid simulations. But it will also have an electric core, and the water simulation will also stutter like an electric effect does. The object of this approach is not to just perform fluid and smoke simulations, which are fairly easy to achieve with some presets. Instead, I want to see how much I can push Bifrost and other Maya simulation tools to achieve fantastical and science fiction-like elemental simulations. As I proceed with this project, I'm going to keep enriching the ideas. The farther I get into the project, the less big ideas will be incorporated. The other phase of production where I will revisit ideation heavily is at the dynamic simulation and video editing stage. At those phases, more ideas will be added to enrich this production and make it feel more explosive and exciting. Realistically, this mannequin blocking and pencil test process cannot be done for every animation project. Sometimes you just have to go in there and go straight from reference study to thumbnails and dive right into the 3D animation. I'm going to move on with this result and make any additional alterations needed as the project progresses. In the next lesson, I'm going to model, texture, and set up the lighting for the set. As I mentioned in the first video of this course, the lights are going to be heavily animated, and towards the end, things get very dark. I also transition into the performance with a very dark set, so all of this is going to be tested out in the next lesson. I'll also be doing some look dev work to see how well the final model is going to render under the lighting conditions. When I first created this character, I got some very good renders, but for the first breakdance animation I did with this character, the initial rendered look didn't transfer through as well. There was a subsurface scattering error that was making the skin act like a light source. I let it slide for the breakdance animation, but I'll resolve it for this project. The not so premium render result also has a lot to do with the render quality settings of the breakdance animation. It was rendered at 1080p with the settings that my local machine could handle. Now that I'm sending everything to a render farm, I'm aiming for a 4K render with some really high sample settings. Alright, I'll see you in the next lesson where I will model the set, UV everything, texture it in Substance Painter or Photoshop, light the set, and do some look dev work to see how well the character renders in the environment.